Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Why We Huddle. Today, we head back to the Atlanta region, a little bit north of that, and we're going to talk to the Kennesaw State University uh, podcast, the Owl Chat podcast, as they are the newest members to the FBS this year and also one of the newer members to the College Huddle. And welcome back, everybody. We're here with Kai from the Owl Chat podcast. Kai, I know I kind of messed up that intro a little bit, but I am glad to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man, and you're good. I know the feeling. Trust me. I'm really glad to be here representing uh, definitely the youngest school in the College Huddle, or youngest football program at least, and also probably being one of the youngest people you're going to talk to across the course of these interviews.
For sure. Now, we're talking about you guys being the youngest. When did Kennesaw State start playing football?
The program was officially founded in 2013. 2014, they had a season where they redshirted everybody and they existed, but they first started playing games in 2015.
Yeah, definitely newer. I think the newest so far I've talked to was Georgia State, which I don't believe those guys are too far from you, are they?
I think they're around 2009, 2010, if I remember correctly. I think they started out with Coach Bill Curry, if that name rings a bell, way back
Yes.
in the day.
So, all right, let's get into it. Kennesaw State obviously started play, I guess, in 2015 after that 2014 redshirt year. What are great things about Kennesaw State? What can you tell us for those who may not have even heard of the school before joining FBS this year?
Yeah, it's kind of surprising how little is known about Kennesaw State with the growth that the school has had over the last decade or so. Because I mean, everybody in the state of Georgia knows about Kennesaw State. I mean, I think we have the highest enrollment in the state. We passed UGA, Georgia Tech, even State. Dating back a couple of years. It's in a really lovely area. Our athletics have had, I would say, enough success to keep interest. It's a nice little hidden gem. We're in Cobb County, where there's a great recruiting base. It's a great family-oriented, not really college town type of place to be. But I really like it here. It's nice. Could go on and on about my experience as a student and all that, but I'm really happy to be here, and I look forward to the word getting out about what we do and how we do things, and hopefully getting some more national recognition, moving up to FBS, and getting those nationally televised games and kind of putting our name on the map a little bit.
For sure. Now, do you know you're joining Conference USA? Do you know if you guys are going to have any like national midweek games? And I'm talking like how there used to be Maction that was Tuesday, Wednesday. Do you know if you have any time frames like that set yet?
Yeah, so what Conference USA is doing is there's a 4 or 5 week period, I want to say in October, where most to all of the games are played on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights. And all of those games are either on one of the ESPN networks, ESPN2, ESPNU, whatever they want to throw us on, depending on how big the game is, or CBS Sports Network. So there's going to be a solid stretch in October where you'll be able to turn on the TV on a Wednesday night and you'll see Kennesaw State playing. And I think that's gonna do big things for us in terms of recognition, like I said.
For sure. And, anywhere's a start. I know being a Florida native, UCF, I remember when they were first coming up from the FCS to FBS, and definitely anytime they could get eyeballs, they wanted it. And seeing them grow, see USF grow when they were a new program, I think a group like you, Georgia State, getting in those positions, I think that's going to be great for the eyeballs and also great for the growth of your relatively young program.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the biggest issues we've talked about with the move up to FBS is having the small stadium in FBS. And we actually talked to the guy who helped design it on our podcast, and he was like, "Well, it's meant to expand to 22,000 or whatever, and if we can just generate local interests with all of the people that live in this area, it's a super dense area. I feel like we'll have no problem trying to fill it up, and I think that's the goal.
So, what is the name of your stadium, and does it have a nickname?
So until just this past year, it was Fifth Third Bank Stadium, but as of a few months ago, they dropped the bank, so now it's just called Fifth Third Stadium. But the athletic department and students have affectionately nicknamed it the Bank, and I hope that sticks, even with the word bank dropping from the official name.
That that does sound fun. I mean, I can't think of too many places that would be called the bank. And you talked about how it's meant to expand to 22,000, which I'll be honest, as an FBS guy or a Power Five fan who's been to a lot of big stadiums, that doesn't sound like a lot. But then I'm also a season ticket holder for Orlando City of MLS, whose stadium is about 28. And
Mm,
so I'm like, yeah, 22,000 is actually a lot more than it sounds, especially for a young program. Hopefully, you do get there and more
sure.
one day for the bank, but very interesting info. Now, I know with a young program, you may or may not have this, but do you have any rivals, or did you have any rivals in FCS, and or who might you start a rivalry with now that you've entered Conference USA?
Oh, there have absolutely been rivalries, and it's worked out pretty well with the move up. The ones we hate, the school out west for us is Jacksonville State in Jacksonville, Alabama. I mean, that's only an hour, 20 minutes, an hour and a half away. It helps that their fans go at us on Twitter too, and there's plenty of banter. That's the no questions asked. We hate those guys every day in every sport. And with them moving to Conference USA the year before, we look forward to continuing that. But I would say the other one that's grown is Liberty, and that's less for geographic reasons because obviously they're way out in Virginia. But we have shared now three different conferences with them across all sports, and a lot of the times we've both been good at the same time. So we've had to play like some really big time games. We beat them in the ASUN basketball championship 2 seasons ago. And then we got a win against them when they had Malik Willis as their quarterback. And that was kind of a thing. And they've got all this money, all these crazy facilities because they've got their private school funds and their donors. And we're a little bit scrappier. And I think it gives us a lot of pride being able to compete with them. But they're top dog as far as football goes in Conference USA going into it, so it's going to be an uphill climb. But those two, especially, I would say Jacksonville State and Liberty. And then if you want to go back further to some of the FCS days, um, some of the teams we'd see all the time when we were playing in the Big South would be Charleston Southern. There used to be a lot of tension there. Went out and covered a game there last year. Absolutely hated the place. Completely understood all the hate. And then school like Gardner Webb, um, who we beat 6 times in a row, never lost to him. But it's like, okay, we see him every year. Might as well grow a little bit of a hatred there.
There you go. And I've got to say, it is interesting for a young school to, you come in, Kai, start naming off rivals. And the reason why that's interesting, for those that haven't listened to the Boise State episode, unfortunately for them, throughout all their movement with athletics, they actually haven't made any real rivals. Like every time they think they're about to, they're moving, to the Mountain West or to the WAC or whatever it is. So it's interesting doing this podcast and seeing schools that have kind of a little bit more of a history, maybe not having rivals. And here we've got probably the newest kid on the block coming in and saying, "Oh yeah, Jacksonville State, no problem," and Liberty. Which I was going to ask, how sweet it would be if this year, your first year in FBS, you went and took out Liberty since they did have that really great year last year.
Man, I've been thinking about that game for months now. It's on a Wednesday night, and I live probably 1,000 feet from the stadium. Um, so I'm planning on covering that game, but I can't wait to just walk over and have some real energy and have all of the college football eyes that are sick enough to watch games on a Wednesday night tune into us doing that. But we know that there are a lot of challenges we're facing this year. And to be honest, we don't have the highest of expectations. But who's to say on a random Wednesday night in October, we can have a good crowd, we can get people into it, we could pull an upset. I think, if you asked a lot of people if they would take that with 3 wins next year, and one of those wins being against Liberty, they would take that in a heartbeat.
For sure. Now, do you remember the date of that as a Wednesday in October? If not, it's okay.
Ooh, I could pull it up if you gave me a second. Give me one moment. I want to say it's the 24th. It is the 23rd, Wednesday, October 23rd.
Oh, nice. Well, I can be honest, Florida and Georgia fans do not have any college football they're looking forward to that week, as we both have a bye week before the annual Florida Georgia game down in Jacksonville. So hopefully you guys can pull in some local Bulldog fans. I will for sure tune in, help get some eyeballs on your game, and hopefully that helps you guys get more eyeballs. So
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think this is one of the biggest advantages for us is having the weekday games, because there are so many Georgia fans, and there's also a lot of Georgia Tech fans down in Atlanta that we have to compete with. And on Saturdays, even alumni, Kennesaw State alumni are still Georgia fans, Georgia Tech fans, born and raised, and it's hard to get them to come to the games and buy in. So having our own time slot is a huge, huge deal, and that's probably the biggest win for us there.
for sure. And speaking of, you're talking about graduates or whatnot. What would you say? And doesn't necessarily have to be football since football's new, but especially if it's football, I guess. What would you say are some traditions or that you could tell us about for Kennesaw State?
I think the one that got the most publicity was the turnover plank thing that we did back when Miami first popularized like the turnover chain, and then every school had their own knockoff, and things got really crazy and honestly really stupid in a lot of places. We have a plank of wood with like a little smiley face drawn on it, and whenever there's a turnover, whoever forced the turnover or recovered the fumble, made the interception, gets to grab the plank and like hold it up to the crowd. And it's, I think, one of the most unique and weird things in college football. And I couldn't tell you who came up with it. I'm sure there's an answer there that some of my co-hosts would know. But I think it's genius marketing. You get that little like Sports Center 5-second clip being like, "Hey, this school you've never heard of till 2 years ago is, they're rocking a, piece of plywood." um, but other than that, the traditions are still growing. A lot of them, I think, would be pretty conventional. We don't have an on-campus stadium. It's about a mile away from our campus, but we have like an owl walk, like a lot of schools, where we'll have a setup where we can watch the coaches and players walk in, and there's a decent little tailgating scene behind and around the stadium. Um, but a lot of things are growing, and those rivalries are a big part of that. People care a surprising amount for how young the rivalries are and how young the school is. So those games are always a big deal. But yeah, it's a young team, it's a young school, and things are developing and developing quickly, and it's good to see.
I've I've got to ask. Have you ever seen the old cartoon from Cartoon Network, Ed, Ed and Eddie?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. When you started talking about your plank, I'm just like, man, someone was a big Ed, Ed and Eddie fan because that
Right.
they had the plank with the smiley face on it. In fact, I'm like, was there a smiling face? And so here I am looking it up
Right.
just to make sure.
Right. Right. So it looks almost exactly like that. And I do believe, I'm pretty confident when I say that it was based on the Ed, Ed and Eddie plank. And that's the reason that we decided not to send it in to the new NCAA football game and EA Sports is because of fear of lawsuit from Cartoon Network. It's like, okay, it's not really our original idea, which sucks because that's one of the things that makes us stick out. But also, like, what are you gonna do? We understand.
Yeah. Now, speaking of, well, I don't want to say mascots for the plank, but kind of moving into mascots. Tell me about Scrappy the Owl. Today was honestly the first time I've looked up pictures. I'll be honest, looks pretty good. It's not frightening, which I've said about one of my favorite things about Georgia State's Panther is that thing looks like it's about to maul a child.
Right.
But Scrappy the Owl, I mean, I don't know if those eyebrows scream owl or unhappy, but it's awesome. What can you tell me, or is there anything to tell about Scrappy?
Yeah, I think Scrappy's a solid mascot. If you want to be scared, go back and look at the old editions of Scrappy or whatever he was called at the time. I think there was a KC because we were like Kennesaw College for a while until really until like the 90s. But there are some terrifying prototypes before we got what we know and love as Scrappy, and we love to bring those up on Twitter to scare people. Um, but yeah, I think Scrappy is recognizable enough for us. Um, I I guess I'm happy with it.
There,
Happy with him.
and I just had to ask, and as I'm looking at some of these, it's like, all right, kind of reminds me of a friend of mine who sends a mutual friend every Easter. He finds terrifying Easter bunny photos, and he sends them to a buddy of mine. So when you're like, yeah, we like to bring them up to scare people, it's like I know that feeling because usually right before Easter, I'm asked, hey, can you check these out and tell me if you think they're good? So for sure. And do you have a live mascot? I just see a picture of owl named Sturgis that popped up when I looked for that. Or
We used to. I don't want to confirm the story. I believe the owl is still alive, but we don't have access to him anymore. There was what I remember being told is there was a bird keeper around the Atlanta area who would just like do shows and I guess collect cool and exotic birds. And he owned it, and I believe he retired. And after that, the Sturgis access was not there anymore. But so he's not around anymore. But he did used to be there.
okay, and interesting bit of history for sure. It just happened to pop up. I'm like, oh, you know what? I will ask you about that. So, one other thing I've got to ask, talking about traditions or whatnot. Do the fans ever who like owls at the opposing team? I just
Uh,
got to.
sure. I mean the slogan is "Hootie Hoo," and you'll hear that play over the loudspeaker. That's actually how we bleep out our swear words on our podcast when somebody slips up is just like an owl hoot sound. So it's there. Some might call it, corny or cliche. Um, I think it maybe stopped being as cool when the school really picked it up and ran with it. Because the Hootie Hoo slogan was originally a student thing, and then time passes and it's on every advertisement, every building, everything everywhere, and when you're thinking about going to college like I was, just you can't escape it and it gets a little annoying. But then time goes by and you embrace it for what it is. I don't know that anybody I've known has hooted at an opposing player, but maybe that's something we could start.
Yeah. Like I just go back, as I know we're talking about college football, and this is my second MLS reference. But like for example, when they do the starting lineups at city games, uh, they'll say opposing goalkeeper number one, and all the people go who. So I didn't know if maybe there's some sort of version for that for the Owls, but if not, there you go, something to start and get you going. And and or you trash after this and say, "Hey, I'm done with that crazy guy." Either way, we'd like to have fun here.
Sure.
Um, Now, well, I guess moving on from the hootie who, but you're talking about the one word being everywhere. One thing I've asked people the last few schools I've talked to is if you could describe the culture of your school in one word, what would that be? So, what would you describe the culture of Kennesaw State as in one word if you've got one?
I think I would go with gritty. We have a lot of students who had friends go to UGA or Georgia Tech, and those were seen as the more desirable options out of high school for a lot of people. And you have a lot of people here who are commuters. I think it's less than 20% of our students live on campus. And people are really here to just grind out their education and do what's important. And when our athletics have success, like when we went to March Madness 2 years ago, and we were the only team from the state of Georgia that did that, it was kind of like, yeah, screw you, I go to Kennesaw State, like we're doing this and you're not, like recently there's been a lot more pride in the school started to grow with the growing athletics. And that's been really good. But it's a lot of grinders here. It's a lot of people who work long night shifts and come to school in the morning, or work in the day, come to school at night. I went to a conference for a class, and this woman was like, "Yeah, I got my degree at KSU, going to night classes while I was doing sanitation work throughout the day," and now she's a millionaire. So there's a grind type of mindset, and I think you have a lot of gritty people here, and the athletics try to reflect that. I mean, the football team slogan is EAT, which stands for effort, attitude, and toughness. So it's all about being the little guy, being the underdog, and overachieving with what you have.
Awesome. And I think that's a great answer. And somehow we still have gone a number of weeks without a repeat word, and that's always great. But I do like that explanation. I do like that eat for sure. So Kai, let's go ahead and talk about your relationship with Kennesaw State. You talked about how you're a student. Uh, can you tell me about your fandom and or your journey with Kennesaw State?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up a massive Georgia Tech fan, and I'll always be a Tech fan. That's not something I can just let go and go away. But
Right.
first and foremost, I'm an owl. I mean, like these athletes are my peers. These are the people I see in class every day. That kind of thing. I was very aware of Kennesaw State because I'm just kind of a dork when it comes to sports, and I was always into following all the teams from Georgia. I'd keep up with how Georgia State was doing every year. I'd keep up with how Georgia Southern was doing every year. And with my passion for sports, I got here for school, and I'm a journalism major. All I want to do is talk about sports for a living. And I was like, this is the perfect place to start because nobody is doing this. I mean, our podcast is the only one. There's very little coverage, and there's a need for it, and people care. And when I started writing for our student paper, I started covering the basketball team, which is something nobody wanted to do because they were just awful for their entire history, had never had a winning season. And then, I'm a freshman student reporter, and they go on this miracle run and make it to the NCAA tournament. And there's just more and more people in the building every night. There's more and more press in the building every night. And it felt like being an extra in a movie. And it was like, is this really happening type of deal? And since then, I've just been in love with the place, in love with the programs. No matter where I go after this, I'll always be an owl. I will always be a fan. This is my place. This is my school, and I would rather be here than be, you know, a tiny fish in a big pond at UGA or Tech. And there's a lot of pride to be had in that. So this is something I'll never let go, regardless of where I end up.
And that's awesome. So you've seen the growth that's happening, and you'll continue to see the growth. That's really cool. Now, what I guess I know since it's a young school, some of these may or may not be around for you, but I guess what's your favorite state or favorite memory? Sorry, favorite memories with Kennesaw State so far.
So definitely the March Madness run and getting to sit courtside and cover that and feel like I got the chance to represent my school. But also, covering my first football game when we played Tusculum, who's a D2 school last year, is definitely up there. Um, Going on all sorts of road trips, coming back from Greensboro after covering Kennesaw State and seeing somebody at a gas station in like the middle of nowhere, South Carolina, um, who recognized the logo on my shirt and they're just like, "Go Owls!" And then um, just the growth, like I talked about last, just getting to watch things develop. But as far as moments go, the NCAA tournament run and the first football game I got to cover.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Do you have any particular, and doesn't matter the sport, do you have any particular uh, favorite player that you've gotten to cover, or just before you got to cover?
Yeah, my guy Alex Peterson, who was on our basketball team 2 years ago when I was a freshman. This dude was from a town of about 1,000 people in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. He had no offers coming out of college. Ended up going to a prep school in the middle of nowhere, Missouri, which is however many miles away. He got there and he was like, I was one of 26 players on a basketball team and I was number 25. He stuck it out there for 2 years at this junior college in the middle of nowhere. Ended up being one of their best players, and then he commits to Kennesaw State the year after they go 1-28 in basketball. He's a 3-year piece in our rotation, and at the end of it, we go to the NCAA tournament. He's like 24 years old. He's got a kid. He's done with his degree, and he gets to play in the NCAA tournament and be a conference champion. And it's like, wow, that guy really never gave up on what he was pursuing, and it was all worth it in the end. And I got to write a feature piece on him for our student paper, and it did really well. And like his old junior college got a hold of it, and then those people got a hold of it, and it got out there. And since then, we've had him on our podcast, and he's been a friend of mine that I still talk to from time to time.
That's really cool. Really cool. And is that piece still up if any of the listeners were to go check out this piece on Alex Peterson?
It is. It's called, if I remember correctly, Alex Peterson's journey from JUCO to March Madness, and it's available at the KSUSentinel.com. If you want to put the effort into just making a couple Google searches, I think it'll be pretty easy to find.
Okay. I will try and find the link. And if I can, I will put it in the description below. So, anyone checking this out, if you want to read that piece, uh, if I can get pulled up, which I imagine I can, that way you don't have to go searching. I'll do the searching for you. Um,
Appreciate it.
yeah, very, very cool to hear for sure. Because that, how many people would stick that out, much less, hey, I'm going to go commit to a team that was 1-28, and
Right.
then that faith be rewarded with a NCAA tournament run, you know.
Right. Right.
Uh, as I say in a lot of these episodes, is there's so many great stories in sports that it's always great to hear them because we don't necessarily know all of them, and I can guarantee you probably 90% of the people that will listen to this have no clue who Alex Peterson is, don't know his story. But hopefully now, a lot more people will, and they'll check out your work as well and just get one more good, feel good college sports story out there. So for
Yeah, no,
sure.
they're everywhere, and getting to cover a school that's not one of the big boys of college sports, you get to see the ones that don't get talked about a whole lot, and that's really cool.
Definitely. And that's one thing I do like about why we huddle is getting to talk to people like yourself who bring these stories that I don't know. Heck, there are stories from some of the bigger schools that I've never heard, and then talking, I hear, oh, how about this? And then there are also stories that I hear not for the first time, but hearing it from the perspective of, the fans of that school brings a whole new layer sometimes. Or I may know the story of a team, but I don't know that that team has an Alex Peterson, someone who really makes a difference. So definitely a lot of cool things out there. So moving into this, what are some things that you're hoping for in the future, that you hope to experience with Kennesaw State?
So I, as a student, got kind of a tough draw with football. Um, when I was a freshman here, we had our first losing season in program history. And then when I was a sophomore last year, was the FCS to FBS transition year. We only played 9 games. We weren't in a conference. We were an FCS independent. We played 3 schools that weren't D1. So it was kind of just like, let's get games on the schedule so we can sell a few tickets, pack it up, and move on. And then this year, we've got all kinds of challenges, but even, if we exceed expectations, we're still ineligible for a bowl berth. We can't, play in a conference championship or have any kind of postseason run. But next year, when we're at the FBS level and we are eligible to play in the postseason, if I could experience us making our first bowl game as a program, that would be huge and something I'd never forget, especially if I got to go out and cover it.
Awesome. And I just want to check one bowl real quick, uh, before I make a comment that I'm gonna regret. Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely you have a chance to come down to Orlando and do the Cure Bowl. And then you can see Orlando City Stadium, third MLS reference, yourself, because that's where it's played. But it's a good little bowl played in a 28,000 seat stadium and right by downtown Orlando. But it's Conference USA, Sun Belt All American Conference. They pull from there, and it's always fun to see what teams and fans get to come into town. And plus, Orlando generally being a destination, at least you're not being sent out to Shreveport.
Right. Yeah.
Not to say there's a certain bowl I wouldn't really want to go to, Independence, uh, but yes, Birmingham. Anyways,
No, yeah, sure. Orlando's a cool city, and I think that's where Georgia State got their first bowl win. I don't know if the state of Atlanta guys talked to you about that, but I think I recall either their first appearance or their first win was the Cure Bowl.
yeah, something like that. I'll have to go back and listen. I'm not sure if we talked about the Cure Bowl too much with them. I know I've brought it up on one or two others. Also, good cause bowl as it does go to breast cancer research. I've actually gotten to meet people who are on the board for the bowl and whatnot over the past few years, off and on, living here in the Orlando area. But so go ahead, tell me about the Owl Chat podcast and uh, what's all that about. Obviously, you've talked about like, hey, there's not really another Kennesaw State podcast, but what angle do you take it from, and what can people expect listening to you guys?
Sure. So it all started with a DM to my co-host and partner John, who is and has been like the Kennesaw State guy on Twitter for a long time. It was me working with the student paper and gaining some access to the athletic department and being credentialed and stuff, and me wanting to be like, well, still love the student paper and I still do. I hope I'm there my entire time as a student, but I also want to take an independent angle on things. So our whole thing is I kind of bring to the table the more journalistic side. I put together a lot of our interviews, and I do, like, I'm the one who goes to the stuff and is more on site, while John is the super fan who this is what he loves. This is what he's passionate about. He's been around for a long time. He knows anything and everything. He's got a lot of great connections, and that helps us kind of combine. I never wanted to compete with him, even though I wanted to be independent. I was like, look, you've got a great thing going, and I've got some ideas I really like. Let's combine this and let's make a monster. And then our producer we brought on, he's a more recent alumni than John, and he's really good just with tech work and audio work, and he helps a lot. And we have a social media guy who's another recent alum, and he's got experience in that field. And none of us make any money. We're good at certain things. We have a blast with it, and as long as we can, never want to stop doing it. It's a great group. The day we stopped is the day we stop having fun and enjoying it, because like I said, it's not about making any kind of money for us. We have like a sponsorship that pays for our expenses, but that's it. We're in it because we love Kennesaw State, and we love being fans, and we want to do everything we can do to prop up and support and expose our student athletes in our department.
Awesome, awesome. And hopefully this gives you even just a little bit more exposure and gets you guys checked out for sure. As you know, I'm hoping a lot of us at the College Huddle, find exposure not just for our schools but for our podcasts and things like that. And it's
Sure.
given us cool opportunities to meet each other, talk about things. I think you told me when we're talking before the uh recording started about how you've already met up with the Pause Up podcast, who we had on in episode 2 from FIU. I'm sure your friends over in Jacksonville State, you may end up doing a podcast episode with them, collab maybe.
We'll see if we want to cross that line. That's a bit of a bigger jump, but yeah. Pazza from FIU. We're yet to do anything with them, but I'm sure we will once football season rolls around, and once we see them on our schedule, because they're going to be a new conference foe. But we've always had a good relationship through Twitter, and they've been very helpful. And they're the ones who kind of guided us into that. And then State of Atlanta, like we've mentioned a few times, the GSU podcast. We've done some stuff with them. I've come on their show, and we've been able to have a good relationship with them too. So we're not totally new to everybody in this network, and I guess it's nice to have a few buddies, especially the ones you don't hate all that much. So
Yeah. And of course, you do have Liberty as well as part of the College Huddle. So
mhm.
just bringing up all the teams, you're like, yeah, kind of rival. But those also sometimes are the most fun podcasts. Like last year, I went on Doghouse Talk before the College Huddle was a thing. In fact, he might be uh, part of the reason I'm here with the College Huddle. Appeared on his podcast for Florida Georgia preview. I always say I'm not picking against the Gators. I will say if there's 1% chance we win a game or not. I'm not sure some of his fans appreciated that, but hey,
Right.
have some fun.
Sure.
But I'm sure you might go into, if you ever did something with those Gamecocks from Alabama, you might feel the same way. You're like, hey, I don't care if we're 0-8 or if we're 10-0, we're beating you.
Yep.
Gotta have that for sure. So speaking of exposure for Kennesaw State, would you who would you say right now is the most famous football player to come out of the Kennesaw State program? Because I've got an idea, but before I say that, who would you say?
So there's a couple different angles I think you can take on this. I think if you want to go the football route, we had our first ever draft pick 2 draft cycles ago. Travis Bell, he's a D lineman. He was taken by the Chicago Bears. He ended up playing with the Falcons for a couple of games, came home, and then he ended up with the Bengals. And he's trying to, still make his NFL career work. That's kind of our one big player alumni. But then there's the obvious one to some people, which is Bronson Rechsteiner, aka Braun Breaker of pro wrestling fame. My co-host is a huge wrestling fan. And whenever something happens, I'm not kidding, that is like an important part of our podcast rundown. We're like, okay, we got to talk about what Braun Breaker did, because he's not only one of the most famous football alumni from the school, but one of the most famous alumni in general. Along with Ryan Seacrest, where there's a whole controversy about whether or not Ryan Seacrest is an alumni, but that's a whole nother discussion. And then we had this dude, Evan Thompson, who was a football player. He was an FCS All-American, I believe, in the one full season he played for us here. And he's gone on to make a solid career out of his social media presence. He golfs now, and he has a really solid like TikTok and Twitter following, and he was a really good player for us. And as he continues to grow in his ventures, I think that'll always be like a cool little thing for him to bring up. Is like, oh yeah, I was an FCS All-American at this school called Kennesaw State, you know. But those are the three that I would give you for sure.
For sure. And I will say this, going back to, you brought up Braun Breaker, a guy whose name is really starting to rise on the main WWE roster. Um, a guy who may one day highlight WrestleMania. So you never know. I know I always hear about The Rock playing at Miami. I've heard about Roman Reigns playing at Georgia Tech. And when I had Rec Talk on the show, he brought that up for sure. So you never know. Just something like that, maybe something else that adds national recognition to the Kennesaw State program.
Yeah, and it was really cool because, like I said, my co-host is a huge wrestling fan and obviously a huge Kennesaw State fan. So when Braun was kind of making his way up the ladder, we would hear about him being in these less popular wrestling circuits. I'm not a big wrestling guy, so I'm not going to pretend like I know
Yeah,
what to talk about. But and then time goes by, and all of a sudden, it's like he's one of these big up and comers, you know. And that's nothing but great publicity. I've heard nothing but good things about Bronson. So definitely wish him the best. I didn't know that you Rec Talk was the Georgia Tech representative of all this. I've seen a lot of his stuff on YouTube, so that's cool.
yeah, he's a good guy. Granted, I've not run into anyone in the college huddle that really isn't. I mean, obviously there are a few misguided people because there are Georgia fans, Tennessee fans, but and that's just a joke, I
I hate
promise.
him too, man. I hate him too. Don't worry about it.
Well, yeah. Growing up a Tech fan, I'm
Yeah.
sure you do. Rec Talk made sure we knew about the hatred for Georgia up there, and of course, we signed off the air with him explaining what THWG meant.
The hell
Um,
with Georgia. We say that sometimes here too at Kennesaw State, but it hasn't quite caught on the same way. But there is, for the core diehard Kennesaw State fans who aren't part-time KSU fans, full-time Georgia fans, there is a bit of a hatred there, but I'm not going to call them like a rival or anything. I mean, they're in a different universe.
right. Which I had someone trying to tell me UCF is a Florida rival yesterday. Sad thing was it was a Florida fan, and I just had to be like you said, it's a different universe. Maybe down the
Right.
road, but right now.
Right.
But with that said, do you have anything else that you would like to tell our listeners? Anything else to say about Kennesaw State? Also, social media. I forgot to ask, where can we find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Kai Millette. I'm sure that'll be in the title, but it's at KAIMILLETTE. And then our podcast account is one we're really trying to grow, and that is at Owl Chat Podcast on Twitter. And our social media manager does a great job of keeping that fresh and fun. So even for non-Kennesaw State fans, I would seriously highly recommend a follow. It's good stuff.
Perfect. And again, any last things you want to say to our listeners before we sign off?
Prepare yourselves, man. 10, 20 years, Kennesaw State will no longer be a new concept. It's growing. We're coming, I promise.
And to be honest, I can't wait to see that Georgia State Kennesaw rivalry really kick off, I'm sure it's coming down the road.
Needs to. They just they can't be scared.
Alrighty. With that said, thank you everyone for listening and discovering why we huddle.